Meteora, Greece. The monasteries are built into the steep, inaccessible rocks, some buildings sitting perched atop high, almost vertical columns. While originally an attractive refuge from the Ottoman Turks, it later proved just as secure from the living dead. Post-war staircases, mostly metal or wood, and all easily retractable, cater to the growing influx of both pilgrims and tourists. Meteora has become a popular destination for both groups in recent years. Some seek wisdom and spiritual enlightenment, some simply search for peace. Stanley MacDonald is one of the latter. A veteran of almost every campaign across the expanse of his native Canada, he first encountered the living dead during a different war, when the 3rd Battalion of Princess Patricia Canadian Light Infantry was involved in drug interdiction operations in Kyrgyzstan. Please don't confuse us with the American Alpha teams. This was long before their deployment, before the panic, before the Israeli self-quarantine. This was even before the first major public outbreak in Cape Town. This was just at the beginning of the spread, before anybody knew anything about what was coming. Our mission was strictly confidential, opium and hash, the primary export crop of terrorists around the world. That's all we'd ever encountered in the rocky wasteland. Traders and thugs and locally hired muscle, that's all we expected. That's all we were ready for. The cave entrance was easy to find. We'd tracked it back from the blood trail leading to the caravan. Right away, we knew something was wrong. There were no bodies. Rival tribes always left their victims laid out and mutilated as a warning to others. There was plenty of blood and bits of brown rotting flesh, but the only corpses we found were the pack mules. They'd been brought down, not shot, by what looked like wild animals. Their bellies were torn out and large bite wounds covered their flesh. We guessed it had been wild hogs. Packs of those damn things roamed the valleys, big and nasty as Arctic wolves. What was most puzzling was the cargo, still in their saddlebags, or just scattered about the bodies. Now, even if this wasn't a territorial hit, even if it was a religious or tribal revenge killing, no one just abandons 50 kilos of prime, raw, bad brown, or perfectly good assault rifles, or expensive personal trophies like watches, mini-disc players, and GPS locators. The blood trail led up to the mountains path from the massacre in the Wadi. A lot of blood. Anyone who lost that much wouldn't be getting up again. Only somehow he did. He hadn't been treated. There were no other track marks. From what we could tell, this man had run, bled, fallen face down. We still could see his bloody face mark imprinted in the sand. Somehow, without suffocating, without bleeding to death, he'd lain there for some time, then just gotten up again and started walking. These new tracks were very different from the old. They were slower, closer together. His right foot was dragging, clearly why he'd lost his shoe, an old worn-out Nike high top. The drag marks were sprinkled with fluid, not blood, not human, but droplets of hard, black, crusted ooze that none of us recognized. We followed these and the drag marks to the entrance of the cave. There was no opening fire, no reception of any kind. We found the tunnel entrance unguarded and wide open. Immediately, we began to see bodies, men killed by their own booby traps. It looked like they'd been running to get out. Beyond them, in the first chamber, we saw our first evidence of a one-sided firefight. One-sided because only one wall of the caravan was pockmarked by small arms. Opposite that wall were the shooters. They'd been torn apart. Their limbs, their bones, shredded and gnawed, some still clutching their weapons. One of those severed hands was an old Marikov still in the grip. This hand was missing a finger. I found it across the room, along with the body of another unarmed man who'd been hit over 100 times. Several rounds had taken the top of his head off. The finger was still stuck between his teeth. Every chamber told a similar story. We found smashed barricades, discarded weapons. We found more bodies or pieces of them. Only the intact ones died from headshots. We found meat, chewed, pulped flesh bulging from their throats and stomachs. You could see by the blood trails, the footprints, the shell casings, and pockmarks that the entire battle had originated from the infirmary. We discovered several cots, all bloody. At the end of the room, we found a headless, I'm guessing, doctor lying on the dirt floor next to a cot with soiled sheets, and clothes in an old, left-footed, worn-out Nike high top. The last tunnel we checked had collapsed from the use of a booby-trapped demolition charge. A hand was sticking out of the limestone. It was still moving. I reacted from the gut, leaned forward, grabbed the hand, felt that grip, like steel, almost crushed my fingers. I pulled back, tried to get away. It wouldn't let me go. I pulled harder, dug my feet in. First the arm came free, then the head, the torn face, wide eyes, and gray lips. Then the other hand, grabbing my arm and squeezing, then came to the shoulders. I fell back, the thing's top half coming with me. The waist down was still jammed under the rocks, still connected to the upper torso by a line of entrails. It was still moving, still clawing me, trying to pull my arm into its mouth. I reached for my weapon. The burst was angled upward, connecting just under behind the chin, and spraying its brains across the ceiling above us. I'd been the only one in the tunnel when it happened. I was the only witness. Exposure to unknown chemical agents. That's what they told me back in Edmonton. That or an adverse reaction to our own prophylactic medication. They threw in a healthy dose of PTSD for good measure. I just needed rest, and a long-term evaluation. Evaluation. That's what happens when it's on your side. It's only interrogation when it's the enemy. They teach you how to resist the enemy, how to protect your mind and spirit. They don't teach you how to resist your own people, especially people who think they're trying to help you see the truth. They didn't break me. I broke myself. I wanted to believe them, and I wanted them to help me. I was a good soldier, well-trained, experienced. I knew what I could do to my fellow human beings and what they could do to me. I thought I was ready for anything. Who in his right mind could have been ready for this? Parnell Air National Guard Base, Memphis, Tennessee, USA. Gavin Blair pilots one of the D-17 combat dirigibles that make up the core of America's Civil Air Patrol. It is a task well suited to him. In civilian life, he piloted a Fujifilm blimp. It stretched to the horizon. Sedans, trucks, buses, RVs, anything that could drive. I saw tractors, I saw a cement mixer. Seriously, I even saw a flatbed with nothing but a giant sign on it, a billboard advertising a gentleman's club. People were sitting on top of it. People were riding on top of everything, on roofs, in between luggage racks. It reminded me of some old pictures of trains in India, with people hanging on them like monkeys. All kinds of crap lined the road. Suitcases, boxes, even pieces of expensive furniture. I saw a grand piano. I'm not kidding, just smashed like it was thrown off the top of a truck. There were also a lot of abandoned cars. Some had been pushed over, some were stripped, some looked burned out. I saw a lot of people on foot, walking across the plains or alongside the road. Some were knocking on windows, holding up all kinds of stuff. A few women were exposing themselves. They must have been looking to trade, probably gas. They couldn't have been looking for rides. They were moving faster than cars. It wouldn't make much sense, but... Back down the road, about 30 miles, traffic was moving a little faster. You'd think the mood would be calmer, and it wasn't. People were flashing their lights, bumping the cars in front of them, getting out and throwing down. I saw a few people lying by the side of the road, barely moving or not at all. People were running past them, carrying stuff, carrying children, or just running, all in the same direction of the traffic. A few miles later, I saw why. Those creatures were swarming around the cars. Drivers on the outer lanes tried to veer off the road, sticking in the mud, trapping the inner lanes. People couldn't open their doors. The cars were too tightly packed. I saw those things reach in open windows, pulling people out or pulling themselves in. A lot of drivers were trapped inside. Their doors were shut and, I'm assuming, locked. Their windows were rolled up. It was safety-tempered glass. The dead couldn't get in, but the living couldn't get out. I saw a few people panic, try to shoot through their windshields, destroying the only protection they had. Stupid. They might have bought themselves a few hours in there, maybe even a chance to escape. Maybe there was no escape, just a quicker end. There was a horse trailer hitched to a pickup in the center lane. It was rocking crazily back and forth. The horses were still inside. The swarm continued among the cars, literally eating its way up the stalled lanes. All those poor bastards just trying to get away. That's what haunts me most about it. They weren't headed anywhere. This was the I-80, a strip of highway between Lincoln and North Platte. Both places were heavily infested, as well as all those little towns in between. What did they think they were doing? Who organized this exodus? Did anyone? Did people see a line of cars and join them without asking? I tried to imagine what it must have been like, stuck bumper to bumper, crying kids, barking dog, knowing what was just a few miles back, and hoping, praying that someone up ahead knows where he's going. You ever hear about the experiment an American journalist did in Moscow in the 70s? He just lined up at some building, nothing special about it, just a random door. Sure enough, someone got in line behind him. Then a couple more. And before you knew it, they were backed up around the block. No one asked what the line was for. They just assumed it was worth it. I can't say if that story was true. Maybe it's an urban legend, or a Cold War myth. Who knows? Bridgetown, Barbados, West Indies Federation. Trevor's Bar personifies the Wild West Indies, or more specifically, each island's special economic zone. This is not a place most people would associate with the order and tranquility of post-war Caribbean life. It is not meant to be, fenced off from the rest of the island and catering to a culture of chaotic violence and debauchery. The special economic zones are engineered specifically to separate off-islanders from their money. My discomfort seems to please T. Sean Collins. The giant Texan slides a shot of Kill Devil rum in my direction, then swings his massive boot-clayed feet onto the table. They haven't come up with a name for what I used to do. Not a real one, not yet. Independent contractor. Sounds like I should be laying drywall and smearing plaster. Private security. Sounds like some dumbass mall guard. Mercenary is the closest, I guess, but at the same time, about as far from the real me as you could have ever gotten. A mercenary sounds like some crazed nut, nom-vet, all tats and handle stash, humping in some third-world cesspool, because he can't hack it back in the real world. That wasn't me at all. Yeah, I was a vet, and yeah, I used my training for cash. Funny thing about the Army, they always promise to teach you marketable skills, but they never mention that, by far, there's nothing more marketable than knowing how to kill some people while keeping others from being killed. Maybe I was a mercenary, but you'd never know to look at me. I was clean cut, nice car, nice house, even a housekeeper who came in once a week. I had plenty of friends, marriage prospects, and my handicap at the country club was almost as good as the pros. Most importantly, I worked for a company no different from any other before the war. There was no cloak and dagger, no back rooms and midnight envelopes. I had vacation days and sick days, full medical and a sweet dental package. I paid my taxes too much. I paid into my IRA. I could have worked overseas. Lord knows there was plenty of demand, but after seeing what my buddies went through in the last brush fire, I said, screw it. Let me guard some fat CEO or worthless dumb celebrity, and that's where I found myself when the panic hit. You don't mind if I don't mention any names, okay? Some of these people are still alive, or their estates are still active, and can you believe they're still threatening to sue? After all that's gone down. Okay, so I can't name names or places, but figure it's an island, a big island, a long island, right next to Manhattan. Can't sue me for that, right? My client, I'm not sure what he really did, something in entertainment or high finance, beats me. I think he might have been one of those senior shareholders in my firm. Whatever, he had bucks, lived in the amazing pad by the beach. Our client liked to know people who were known by all. His plan was to provide safety for those who could raise his image during and after the war, playing Moses to the scared and famous. And you know what? They fell for it. The actors and singers and rappers and pro athletes and just the professional faces, like the ones you would see on talk shows or reality shows, or even that little rich, spoiled, tired-looking whore who was famous for just being a rich, spoiled, tired-looking whore. There was that record mogul guy with the big old diamond earrings. He had this tricked-out AK with a grenade launcher. He loved to talk about how it was an exact replica of the one from Scarface. I didn't have the heart to tell him that Senor Montana had used a 16A1. There was a political comedy guy, you know, the one with the show. He was snorting blow between the airbags of this teeny Thai stripper while spewing out about what was happening wasn't just about the living versus the dead. It would send shockwaves through every facet of our society. Social, economic, political, even environmental. He said that, subconsciously, everyone already knew the truth during the Great Denial. And that's why they wigged out so hard when the story was finally broken. It all actually kind of made sense, until he started spewing about high fructose corn syrup and the feminization of America. Crazy, I know, but you kind of expected these people to be there. At least, I did. What I didn't expect was all of their people. Every one of them, no matter who they were or what they did, had to have at least, I don't know, how many stylists, publicists, and personal assistants. Some of them, I think, were pretty cool, just doing it for the money, or because they figured they'd be safe there. Young people just trying to get a leg up, can't fault them for that. Some of the others, though, real pricks, all high on the smell of their own piss. Just rude and pushy, and ordering everyone else around. One guy sticks out in my mind, only because he wore this baseball cap that read, "Get it done." I think he was the chief handler of the fat fuck who won the talent show. That guy must have had 14 people around him. I remember thinking at first that it would be impossible to take care of all of these people, but after my initial tour of the premises, I realized our boss had planned for everything. He transformed his home into a survivalist wet dream. He had enough dehydrated food to keep an army fed for years, as well as an endless supply of water from a desalinizer that ran right into the ocean. He had wind turbines, solar panels, and backup generators with giant fuel tanks buried right under the courtyard. He had enough security measures to hold off the living dead forever. High walls, motion sensors, and weapons. Oh, the weapons. Yeah, our boss had really done his homework. But what he was most proud of was the fact that every room in the house was wired for a simultaneous webcast that went out all over the world 24/7. This was the real reason for having all his closet and best friends over. He just didn't want the ride of the storm in comfort and luxury. He wanted everyone to know he'd done it. That was the celebrity angle, his way of ensuring high-profile exposure. Not only did you have a webcam in almost every room, but there was also the usual press you'd find on the Oscars red carpet. I honestly never knew how big an industry entertainment journalism was. There had to be dozens of them, there from all their magazines and TV shows. How are you feeling? I heard that a lot. How are you holding up? What do you think is going to happen? And I swear I even heard someone say, "What are you wearing?" For me, the most surreal moment was standing in the kitchen with some of the stuff and other bodyguards, all of us watching the news that was showing, guess what? Us. The cameras were literally in the other room, pointed at some of the stars that they sat on the couch watching another news channel. That feed was live from New York's Upper East Side. The dead were coming right up 3rd Avenue. People were taking them on hand by hand, hammers and pipes. The manager of a Modell's sporting goods was handing out baseball bats and shouting, "Get him in the head!" There was this one guy on rollerblades. He had a hockey stick in his hand, a big old meat cleaver bolted to the blade. He was doing an easy 30 at the speed he might have taken a neck or two. The camera saw the whole thing. The rotted arm that shot out of the sewer drain right in front of him. The poor guy back-flipping in the air, coming down hard on his face, then being dragged, screaming by his ponytail, into the drain. At that moment, the camera in our living room swung back to catch the reaction of the watching celebs. There were a few gasps, some honest, some staged. I remember thinking I had less respect for the ones who tried to fake some tears than I did for the little spoiled whore who called the rollerblading guy a dumbass. Hey, at least she was being honest. I remember I was standing next to this guy, Sergey, a miserable, sad-faced, hulking motherfucker. His stories about growing up in Russia convinced me that not all third world cesspools had to be tropical. It was when the camera was catching the reactions of the beautiful people that he mumbled something to himself in Russian. The only word I could make out was Romanovs, and I was about to ask him what he meant when all heard the alarm go off. Something had triggered the pressure sensors we'd placed several miles around the wall. They were sensitive enough to detect just one zombie. Now they were going crazy. Our radios were squawking, "Contact, contact, southwest corner." Shit, there were hundreds of them. It was a damn big house. It took me a few minutes to get my firing position. I didn't understand why the lookout was so nervous. So what if there was a couple hundred? They'd never get over that wall. Then I heard him shout, "They're running! Holy fucking shit, they're fast!" Fast zombies. That turned my gut. If they could run, they could climb. If they could climb, maybe they could think. And if they could think, now I was scared. I remember our boss's friends were all raiding the armory, racing around like extras in an 80s action flick by the time I made the 3rd floor guest room window. I flipped the safety off my weapon and flipped the guards off my sight. It was one of the newest gens, a fusion of light implication and thermal imaging. I didn't need the second part because G's gave off no body heat. So when I saw the searing bright green signatures of several hundred runners, my throat tightened. Those weren't living dead. "There it is," I heard them shout. "There's the house on the news." They were carrying ladders, guns, babies. A couple of them had these heavy satchels strapped to their backs. They were booking it for the front gate. Big, tough steel that was supposed to stop 1,000 ghouls. The explosion tore them right off their hinges, sent them flipping into the house like giant ninja stars. "Fire!" the boss was screaming into the radio. "Knock 'em down. Kill him! Shoot, shoot, shoot! The attackers, for lack of a better label, stampeded for the house. The courtyard was full of parked vehicles, sport cars and Hummers, and even a monster truck belonged to some NFL cat. Freaking fireballs, all of them. Blowing over on their sides or just burning in place. This thick, oily smoke from their tires, blinding and choking everyone. All you could hear was gunfire, ours and theirs, and not just our private security team. Any big shot who wasn't crapping his pants either had it in his head to be a hero or felt he had to protect his rep in front of these peeps. A lot of them demanded that their entourage protect them. Some did. These poor 20-year-old personal assistants who'd never fired a gun in their lives. They didn't last very long. But then there were also some peons who turned and joined the attackers. I saw this one real queenie hairdresser stab an actress in the mouth with a letter opener, and ironically, I watched Mr. Get It Done try to wrestle a grenade away from the talent show guy before it went off in their hands. It was bedlam. Exactly what you thought the end of the world was supposed to look like. Part of the house was burning, blood everywhere, bodies or bits of them spewed out over the expensive stuff. I met the whore's rat dog as we were both hiding in the back door. He looked at me. I looked at him. If it had been a conversation, it probably would have gone like, "What about your master? What about yours? Fuck him." That was the attitude amongst a lot of the hired guns. The reason I hadn't fired a shot all night. We've been paid to protect rich people from zombies, not against other not-so-rich people who just wanted a safe place to hide. You could hear them shouting as they charged in through the front door. Not, "Grab the booze," or "Rape the bitches." It was, "Put out the fire," and "Get the women and kids upstairs." I stepped over Mr. Political Comedy Guy on my way up to the beach. He and this chick, this leathery old blonde who I thought was supposed to be his political enemy, were going at it like there was no tomorrow. And hey, maybe for them there wasn't. I made it out of for the sand, found a surfboard, probably worth more than the house I grew up in, and started paddling for the lights on the horizon. There were a lot of boats on the water that night, a lot of people getting out of Dodge. I hoped one of them might give me a ride as far as New York Harbor. Hopefully I could bribe them with a pair of diamond earrings. Sometimes I ask myself, why didn't all of them just shut the fuck up, you know? Not just my boss, but all of those pampered parasites. They had the means to stay way out of harm's way, so why didn't they use it? Go to Antarctica or Greenland, or just stay where they were, but stay the hell out of the public eye. But then again, maybe they couldn't. Like a switch you just can't turn off. Maybe it's what made them in the first place. But what the hell do I know? If you got it, flaunt it. Ice City, Greenland. From the surface, all that is visible are the funnels, the massive, carefully sculpted wind catchers that continue to bring fresh, albeit cold air to the 300-kilometer maze below. Few of the 250,000 people who once inhabited this hand-carved marvel of engineering have remained. Some stay to encourage the small but growing tourist trade. Some are here as custodians, living on the pension that goes with UNESCO's renewed World Heritage Program. Some, like Ahmed Faranakian, formerly Major Faranakian, of the Iranian Revolution Guard Corps Air Force, have nowhere else to go. India and Pakistan, like North and South Korea, or NATO and the old Warsaw Pact. If two sides were going to use nuclear weapons against each other, it had to be India and Pakistan. Everyone knew it. Everyone expected it. And that is exactly why it didn't happen. Because the danger was so omnipresent, all the machinery had been put in place over the years to avoid it. The hotline between the two capitals was in place. Ambassadors were on a first-name basis, and generals, politicians, and everyone involved in the process was trained to make sure that the day they all feared never came. No one could have imagined, I certainly didn't, that events would unfold as they did. The infection hadn't hit us as hard as some other countries. Our land was very mountainous. Transportation was difficult. Our population was relatively small, given the size of our country, and when you consider that many of our cities could be easily isolated by a proportionally large military, it is not difficult to see how optimistic our leadership was. The problem was refugees, millions of them from the east, millions, streaming across Balochistan, throwing our planes into disarray. So many areas were already infected, great swarms slouching towards our cities. Our border guards were overwhelmed, entire outposts buried under waves of ghouls. There was no way to close the border and, at the same time, deal with our own outbreaks. We demanded that the Pakistanis get control of their people. They assured us that they were doing all they could. We knew they were lying. The majority of refugees came from India, just passing through Pakistan in an attempt to reach someplace safe. Those in Islamabad were quite willing to let them go. Better to pass the problem along to another nation than have to deal with it themselves. Perhaps if we could have combined our forces, coordinated a joint operation at some appropriately defensible location. I know the plans were on the table. Pakistan's south-central mountains, the Pab, the Kurthar, the central Barhu range. We could have stopped any number of refugees or living dead. Our plan was refused. Some paranoid military attaché at their embassy told us outright that any foreign troops on their soil would have been seen as a declaration of war. I don't know if the president ever saw our proposal. Our leaders never spoke to him directly. You see what I mean about India and Pakistan? We didn't have their relationship. The diplomatic machinery was not in place. For all we know, this little shit-eating colonel informed his government that we were attempting to annex their western provinces. But what could we do? Every day hundreds of thousands of people crossed our border, and of those perhaps tens of thousands were infected. We had to take decisive action. We had to protect ourselves. There is a road that runs between our two countries. It is small by your standards, not even paved in most places, but it was the main southern artery in Balochistan. To cut it at just one place, the Ketch River Bridge would have effectively sealed off 60% of all refugee traffic. I flew the mission myself, at night with a heavy escort. You didn't need image intensifiers. You could see the headlights from miles away, a long, thin white trail in the darkness. I could even see small-arm flashes. The area was heavily infested. I targeted the bridge's center foundation, which would be the hardest part to repair. The bombs separated cleanly. They were high explosive, conventional ordnance, just enough to do the job. American aircraft, from when we used to be your allies of convenience, used to destroy a bridge built with American aid for the same purpose. The irony was not lost on the high command. Personally, I could have cared less. As soon as I felt my phantom lighten, I hit my burners, waited for my observer plane's report, and prayed with all my might that the Pakistanis wouldn't retaliate. Of course, my prayers went unanswered. 3 hours later, their garrison at Kila Safed shot up our border station. I know now that our president and Ayatollah were willing to stand down. We'd gotten what we wanted. They'd gotten their revenge. Tit for tat, let it go. But who was going to tell the other side? Their embassy in Tehran had destroyed its codes and radios. That son of a bitching colonel had shot himself rather than betray any state secrets. We had no hotline, no diplomatic channels. We didn't know how to contact the Pakistani leadership. Didn't even know if there was any leadership left. It was such a mess. Confusion, turning to anger, anger turning on our neighbors. Every hour, the conflict escalated. Border clashes, airstrikes. It happened so fast. Just 3 days of conventional warfare, neither side having any clear objective. Just panicked rage. We created a beast, a nuclear monster that neither side could tame. Tehran, Islamabad, Qom, Lahore, Bandar, Abbas, Marmara, Amman, Khomeini, Faisalabad. No one knows how many died in the blasts or would die when the radiation clouds began to spread over our countries, over India, Southeast Asia, the Pacific, over America. No one thought it could happen, not between us. For God's sake, they helped us build our nuclear program from the ground up. They supplied the materials, the technology, the third-party brokering with North Korea and Russian renegades. We wouldn't have been a nuclear power if it wasn't for our fraternal Muslim brothers. No one would have expected it, but then again, no one would have expected the dead to rise, now would they? Only one could have foreseen this, and I don't believe in him anymore. Kyoto, Japan. The old photo of Kondo Tatsumi shows a skinny, acne-faced teenager with dull red eyes and bleached blonde highlights streaking his unkept hair. The man I was speaking to has no hair at all. Clean-shaven, tanned and toned, his clear, sharp gaze never leaves mine. Although his manner is cordial and his mood light, this warrior monk retains the composure of a predatory animal at rest. I was in otaku. I know that term has come to mean a great many things to a great many people, but for me, it simply meant outsider. I know Americans, especially young ones, must feel trapped by societal pressure. All humans do. However, if I understand your culture correctly, individualism is something to be encouraged. You revere the rebel, the rogue, those who stand proudly apart from the masses. For you, individuality is a badge of honor. For us, it is a ribbon of shame. We lived, particularly before the war, in a complex and seemingly infinite labyrinth of external judgments. Your appearance, your speech, everything from the career you had to the way you sneezed had to be planned and orchestrated to follow rigid Confucian doctrine. Some either have the strength, or lack thereof, to accept this doctrine. Others, like myself, chose exile in a better world. That world was cyberspace, and it was tailor-made for Japanese otaku. I can't speak for your educational system, or indeed for that of any other country, but ours was based almost entirely on fact retention. From the day we first set foot in a classroom, pre-war Japanese children were injected with volumes upon volumes of facts and figures that had no practical application in our lives. Those facts had no moral component, no societal context, no human connection to the outside world. They had no reason for existence, other than they were mastery allows ascension. Pre-war Japanese children were not taught to think, we were taught to memorize. You can understand how this education would easily lend itself to an existence in cyberspace. In a world of information without context, where status was determined on its acquisition and possession, those of my generation could rule like gods. I was a sensei, master over all I surveyed, be it discovering the blood type of the Prime Minister's cabinet, or the tax receipts of Matsumoto and Hamada, or the location and condition of all Shingonto swords of the Pacific War. I didn't have to worry about my appearance, or my social etiquette, my grades, or my prospects for the future. No one could judge me, no one could hurt me. In this world, I was powerful, and more importantly, I was safe. When the crisis reached Japan, my clique, as with all the others, forgot our previous obsessions and devoted our energies entirely to the living dead. We studied their physiology, behavior, weaknesses, and the global response to their attack upon humanity. The last subject was my clique's specialty, the possibility of containment within the Japanese home islands. I collected population statistics, transport networks, police doctrine. I memorized everything from the size of the Japanese merchant fleet to how many roads the Army's Type 89 assault rifle held. No fact was too small or obscure. We were on a mission. We barely slept. When school was eventually canceled, it gave us the ability to be wired in almost 24 hours a day. I was the first to hack into Dr. Komatsu's personal hard drive, and read the raw data a full week before he presented his findings to the Diet. This was a coup. It further elevated my status among those who already worshipped me. Dr. Komatsu first recommended the evacuation? He did. Like us, he'd been compiling the same facts, but whereas we'd been memorizing them, he'd been analyzing them. Japan was an overcrowded nation. 128 million people jammed into less than 370,000 square kilometers of either mountains or over-urbanized islands. Japan's low crime rate gave it one of the relatively smallest and most lightly armed police forces in the industrialized world. Japan was pretty much also a demilitarized state. Because of American protection, our self-defense forces had not seen an actual combat since 1945. Even those token troops who were deployed to the Gulf almost never saw any serious action and spent most of their occupation duty within the protected walls of their isolated compound. We had access to all these bits of information, but not the wherewithal to see where they were pointing. So it took us all the complete surprise when Dr. Komatsu publicly declared that the situation was hopeless and that Japan had to be immediately evacuated. That must have been terrifying. Not at all. It set off an explosion of frenzied activity, a race to discover where our population might resettle. Would it be the South, the coral atolls of the Central and South Pacific, or would we head north, colonizing the Kurils, Sakhalin, or maybe somewhere in Siberia? Whoever would uncover the answer would be the greatest otaku in cyber history. And there was no concern for your personal safety? Of course not. Japan was doomed, but I didn't live in Japan. I lived in a world of free-floating information. The Siafu, that's what we all were calling the infected now, weren't something to be feared, they were something to be studied. You have no idea the kind of disconnect I was suffering. My culture, my upbringing, and now my otaku lifestyle all combined to completely insulate me. Japan might be evacuated, Japan might be destroyed, and I would watch it all happen from the safety of my digital mountaintop. What about your parents? What about them? We lived in the same apartment, but I never really conversed with them. I'm sure they thought I was studying. Even when school closed, I told them I still had to prepare for exams. They never questioned it. My father and I rarely spoke. In the mornings, my mother would have a breakfast tray at my door. At night, she would leave dinner. The first time she didn't leave a tray, I thought nothing of it. I woke up that morning, as I always did, gratified myself, as I always did, logged on, as I always did. It was midday before I started to feel hungry. I hated those feelings, hunger or fatigue, or, the worst, sexual desire. Those were physical distractions. They annoyed me. I reluctantly turned away from my computer and opened my bedroom door. No food. I called for my mother. No answer. I went into the kitchen area, grabbed some raw ramen, and ran back to my desk. I did it again that night, and again the next morning. You never questioned where your parents were? The only reason I cared was because of the precious minutes I was wasting having to feed myself. In my world, too many exciting things were happening. What about the other otaku? Didn't they discuss their fears? We shared facts, not feelings, even when they started to disappear. I'd noticed that someone had stopped returning email or else hadn't posted for a while. I'd see that they hadn't logged on in a day or that their servers were no longer active. And that didn't scare you? It annoyed me. Not only was I losing a source of information, I was losing potential praise for my own. To post some new factoid about Japanese evacuation ports and to have 50 instead of 60 responses was upsetting. Then to have those 50 drop to 45, then to 30. How long did this go on for? About 3 days. The last post from another otaku in Sendai stated that the dead were now flowing out of Tohaku University Hospital in the same cho as his apartment. And that didn't worry you? Why should it? I was too busy trying to learn all I could about the evacuation process. How was it going to be executed? What government organizations were involved? Would the camps be in Kamchatka or Sakhalin or both? And what was this I was reading about the rash of suicides that was sweeping the country? So many questions, so much data to mine. I cursed myself for having to go to sleep that night. When I woke up, the screen was blank. I tried to sign on. Nothing. I tried rebooting. Nothing. I noticed that I was on backup battery. Not a problem. I had enough reserve power for 10 hours at full use. I also noticed that my signal strength was at 0. I couldn't believe it. Kokuro, like all Japan, had a state-of-the-art wireless network that was supposed to be fail-safe. One server might go down, maybe even a few, but the whole net? I realized it might be my computer. It had to be. I got out my laptop and tried to sign on. No signal. I cursed and got up to tell my parents that I had to use their desktop. They still weren't home. Frustrated, I tried to pick up the phone to call my mother's cell. It was cordless, dependent on wall power. I tried the cell and got no reception. Do you know what happened to them? No. Even to this day, I have no idea. I know they didn't abandon me. I'm sure of it. Maybe my father was caught out at work, my mother trapped while trying to go grocery shopping. They could have been lost together, going to or coming back from their relocation office. Anything could have happened. There was no note, nothing. I've been trying to find out ever since. I went back into my parents' room just to make sure they weren't there. I tried the phones again. It wasn't bad yet. I was still in control. I tried to go back online. Isn't that funny? All I could think about was trying to escape again, getting back to my world, being safe. Nothing. I started to panic. Now, I started to say, trying to command my computer to force its will back on. Now, 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 now. I started beating the monitor. My knuckles split. The sight of my own blood terrified me. I'd never played sports as a child, never been injured. It was all too much. I picked up the monitor and threw it against the wall. I was crying like a baby, shouting, hyperventilating. I started to retch and vomited all over the floor. I got up and staggered to the front door. I don't know what I was looking for, just that I had to get out. I opened the door and stared into the darkness. Did you try knocking at the neighbor's door? No. Isn't that odd? Even at the height of my breakdown, my social anxiety was so great that actually risking personal contact was still taboo. I took a few steps, slipped and fell into something soft. It was cold and slimy, all over my hands, my clothes. It stank. The whole hallway stank. I suddenly became aware of a low, steady scraping noise, like something was dragging itself across the hallway toward me. I called out, "Hello?" I heard a soft, gurgling groan. My eyes were just beginning to adjust to the darkness. I began to make out a shape, large, humanoid, crawling on its belly. I sat there, paralyzed, wanting to run, but at the same time wanting to know for sure. My doorway was casting a narrow rectangle of dim gray light against the far wall. As the thing moved into the light, I finally saw its face, perfectly intact, perfectly human, except for the right eye that hung by the stem. The left eye was locked on mine, and its gurgling moan became a choked rasp. I jumped to my feet, sprang back inside my apartment, and slammed the door behind me. My mind was finally clear, maybe for the first time in years, and I suddenly realized that I could smell smoke and hear faint screams. I went over to the window and threw the curtains open. Kokura was engulfed in hell. The fires, the wreckage, the siafu were everywhere. I watched them crash through doors, invade apartments, devour people cowering in corners or on balconies. I watched people leap to their deaths or break their legs and spines. They lay on the pavement, unable to move, wailing in agony as the dead closed in around them. One man in the apartment directly across from me tried to fight them off with a golf club. They bent harmlessly across the zombie's head before 5 of them pulled him for the floor. Then a pounding at the door. My door. This bomb, bomb, bomb from the bottom near the floor. I hear the thing groaning outside. I heard other noises too, from the other apartments. They were my neighbors, the people I'd always tried to avoid, whose faces and names I could barely remember. They were screaming, pleading, struggling, and sobbing. I heard one voice, either a young woman or a child on the floor above me, calling someone by name, begging them to stop. But the voice was swallowed in a chorus of moans. The banging at my door became louder. More siafu had shown up. I tried to move the living room furniture against the door. It was a waste of effort. Our apartment was, by your standards, pretty bare. The door began to crack. I could see its hinges straining. I figured I had maybe a few minutes to escape. But if the door was jammed, out the window, onto the balcony of the apartment below. I thought I could tie bed sheets into a rope. I'd heard about it from an otaku who studied American prison breaks. It would be the first time I ever applied any of my archived knowledge. Fortunately, the linen held. I climbed out of my apartment and started to lower myself down to the apartment below. Immediately, my muscles started cramping. I'd never paid much attention to them, and now they were reaping their revenge. I struggled to control my emotions and to not think about the fact that I was 19 floors up. The wind was terrible, hot and dry from all the fires. A gust picked me up and slammed me against the side of the building. I bounced off the concrete and almost lost my grip. I could feel the bottom of my feet bumping against the balcony's railing, and it took all the courage I had to relax enough to climb down just those few extra feet. I landed on my ass, panting and coughing from the smoke. I could hear sounds from the apartment above, the dead that had broken through the front door. I looked up at my balcony and saw ahead. The one-eyed siafu was squeezing himself through the opening between the rail and the balcony floor. It hung there for a moment, half out, half in, then gave another lurch toward me and slid over the side. I'll never forget that it was still reaching for me as it fell. This nightmare flash of its suspended in midair, arms out, hanging eyeball, now flying upward against its forehead. I could hear the other siafu groaning on the balcony above, and turned to see if there were any in this apartment with me. Fortunately, I saw that the front door had been barricaded, like mine. However, unlike mine, there weren't any sounds or of attackers outside. I was also comforted by the layer of ash on the carpet. It was deep and unbroken, telling me that no one or nothing had been walking across the floor for a couple days. For a moment, I thought I might be alone, and then I noticed the smell. I slid the bathroom door open and was blown back by the invincible putrid cloud. The woman was in her tub. She had slit her wrists, long vertical slices along the arteries, to make sure the job was done right. Her name was Ryaiku. She was the only neighbor I'd made any effort to know. She was a high-priced hostess at a club for a foreign businessman. I'd always fantasized about what she looked like naked. Now I knew. Strangely enough, what bothered me most was that I didn't know any prayers for the dead. I'd forgotten what my grandparents had tried to teach me as a little kid. Rejected it as obsolete data. It was a shame how out of touch I was with my heritage. All I could do was stand there, like an idiot, and whispered an awkward apology for taking some of her sheets. Her sheets? For more rope. I knew I couldn't stay there for very long. Besides the health hazard of a dead body, there was no telling when the siafu on that floor would sense my presence and attack the barricade. I had to get out of this building, get out of the city, and hopefully try to find a way to get out of Japan. Didn't have a fully thought-out plan yet. I just knew I had to keep on going, one floor at a time, until I reached the street. I figured stopping at a few of the apartments would give me a chance to gather supplies, and as dangerous as my sheet rope method was, it couldn't be any worse than the siafu that would almost certainly be lurking in the building's hallways and stairways. Wouldn't it be more dangerous once you reach the streets? No. Safer. No, honestly. That was one of the things I'd learned online. The living dead were slow and easy to outrun, or even outwalk. Indoors, I might run the risk of being trapped in some narrow choke point, but out in the open, I had infinite options. Better still, I'd learned from online survivor reports that the chaos of a full-blown outbreak could actually work to one's advantage. With so many other frightened, disorganized humans to distract the Siafu, why would they even notice me? As long as I watched my step, kept up at a brisk pace, and didn't have the misfortune to be hit by a fleeing motorist or a stray bullet, I figured I had a pretty good chance of navigating my way through the chaos of the streets below. The real problem was getting there. It took me 3 days to make it all the way down to the ground floor. This was partially due to my disgraceful physical stamina. A trained athlete would have done my makeshift rope antics a challenge, so you can imagine what they were for me. In retrospect, it's a miracle I didn't plunge to my death, or succumb to infection with all the scrapes and scratches I endured. My body was held together with adrenaline and pain medication. I was exhausted, nervous, horribly sleep-deprived. I couldn't rest in the conventional sense. Once it got dark, I would move everything I could against the door, then sit in a corner, crying, nursing my wounds, and cursing my frailty until the sky began to lighten. I did manage to close my eyes one night, even drift off to sleep for a few moments. But then the banging of a Siafu against the front door sent me scurrying out the window. I spent the remainder of that night huddled on the balcony of the next apartment. Its sliding glass door was locked. I just didn't have the strength to kick it in. My second delay was mental, not physical. Specifically, my otaku's obsessive-compulsive drive to find just the right survival gear, no matter how long it took. My online searches had taught me all about the right weapons, clothing, food, and medicine. The problem was finding them in an apartment complex of urban salarymen. I made quite a sight, shimmying down the sheetrope in a businessman's raincoat and Ryako's bright pink vintage Hello Kitty schoolbag. It had taken a long time, but by the third day, I had almost everything I needed. Everything except a reliable weapon. There wasn't anything? This was not America, where they used to be more firearms than people. True fact, an otaku in Kobe hacked this information directly from your National Rifle Association. I meant a hand tool, a hammer, a crowbar. What salaryman does his own home maintenance? I thought of a golf club. There were many of those, but I saw what that man across the way had tried to do. I did find an aluminum baseball bat, but it had been so much action that it had been too bent out of shape to be effective. I looked everywhere, believe me, but there was nothing hard or strong or sharp enough I could use to defend myself. I also reasoned that once I made it to the street, I might have better luck. A truncheon from a dead policeman, or even a soldier's firearm, those were the thoughts that almost got me killed. I was 4 floors from the ground, almost literally at the end of my rope. Each section I made extended for several floors, just enough length to allow me to gather more sheets. This time, I knew would be the last. By now, I had my entire escape plan worked out. Land on the 4th floor balcony, break into the apartment for a few new sheets. I'd given up looking for a weapon by then. Slide down to the sidewalk, steal the most convenient motorcycle, even though I had no idea how to ride one, streaking off like some old-timely Bosozuko, and maybe even grab a girl or two along the way. My mind was barely functioning by that point. If even the first part of the plan had worked out, and I did manage to make it to the ground in that state, well, what matters is that I didn't. I landed on the 4th floor balcony, reached for the sliding door, and looked up right in the face of a Siafu. It was a young man, mid-20s, wearing a torn suit. His nose had been bitten off, and he dragged his bloody face across the glass. I jumped back, grabbed onto the rope, and tried to climb back up. My arms wouldn't respond. No pain, no burning. I mean, they had just reached their limit. The Siafu began howling and beating his fists against the glass. In desperation, I tried to swing myself from side to side, hoping to maybe rappel against the side of the building and land on the side balcony next to me. The glass shattered and the Siafu charged for my legs. I pushed off from the main building, letting go of the rope and launching myself with all the might, and I missed. The only reason we are speaking now is that my diagonal fall carried me into the balcony below my target. I landed on my feet, stumbled forward, and almost went toppling off the other side. I stumbled into the apartment and immediately looked around for any Siafu. The living room was empty. The only piece of furniture, a small traditional table propped up against the door. The occupant must have committed suicide like the others. I didn't smell anything foul, so I guessed he must have thrown himself out of the window. I reasoned that I was alone, and just this small measure of relief was enough to cause my legs to give out from under me. I slumped against the living room wall, almost delirious with fatigue. I found myself looking at a collection of photographs decorating the opposite wall. The apartment's owner had been an old man, and the photographs told of a very rich life. He had a large family, many friends, and had traveled to what seemed like very many exciting and exotic locales around the world. I'd never even imagined leaving my bedroom, let alone even leading that kind of life. I promised myself that if I ever made it out of this nightmare, I wouldn't just survive, I would live. My eyes fell on the only item in the room, a kami-dana, or traditional Shinto shrine. Something was on the floor beneath it. I guessed a suicide note. The wind must have blown it off when I entered. It didn't feel right just leaving it there. I hobbled across the room and stopped to pick it up. Many kami-dani have a small mirror in the center. My eye caught a reflection in the mirror of something shambling out of the bedroom. The adrenaline kicked in just as I wheeled around. The old man was still there, the bandage on his face telling me that he must have reanimated not too long ago. He came at me. I ducked. My legs were still shaky, and he managed to catch me by the hair. I twisted, trying to free myself. He pulled my face toward his. He was surprisingly fit for his age, muscle equal to, if not superior, to mine. His bones were brittle, though, and I heard them crack as I grabbed the arm that caught me. I kicked him in the chest. He flew back. His broken arm was still clutching a tuft of my hair. He knocked against the wall, photographs falling and showering him with glass. He snarled and came at me again. I backed up, tensed, then grabbed him by his one good arm. I jammed it back into his back, clamped my other hand around the back of his neck, and with a roaring sound I didn't even know I could make, I shoved him, ran him right onto the balcony and over the side. He landed face up on the pavement, his head still hissing up at me from his otherwise broken body. Suddenly, there was a pounding on the front door. More Siafu that had heard our scuffle. I was operating on full instinct now. I raced into the old man's bedroom and began ripping the sheets off his bed. I figured it wouldn't take too many, just 3 more stories, and then I stopped, frozen, as motionless as a photograph. That's what had caught my attention. One less photograph that was on the bare wall in the bedroom. It was black and white, grainy, and showed a traditional family. There was a mother, father, a little boy, and what I guessed had to be the old man as a teenager in uniform. Something was in his hand, something that almost stopped my heart. I bowed to the man in the photograph and said in an almost tearful arigato. What was in his hand? I found it at the bottom of a chest in his bedroom, underneath a collection of bound papers and the ragged remains of the uniform from the photo. The scabbard was green, chipped army issue aluminum, and the improvised leather grip had replaced the original shark skin, but the steel, bright like silver, and folded, not machine stamped. A shallow torii curvature with a long, straight point. Flat, wide ridge lines decorated the kikusu, the imperial chrysanthemum, and in an authentic, not acid-stained, riverboarding the tempered edge. Exquisite workmanship, and clearly forged for battle. Denver, Colorado, USA. Todd Ueno walks me to the train, savoring the 100% tobacco Cuban cigarettes I've bought him as a parting gift. Yeah, I lose it sometimes, for a few minutes, maybe an hour. Dr. Chandra told me it was cool though. He cancels right here at the VA. He told me once that it's totally a healthy thing, like little earthquakes releasing pressure off of a fault. He says anyone who's not having these minor tremors, you really gotta watch out for. Doesn't take much to set me off. Sometimes I'll smile, I'll smell something, or somebody's voice will sound very familiar. Last month at dinner, the radio was playing this song. I don't think it was about my war. I don't even think it was American. The accent and some of the terms were all different, but the chorus, God help me, I was only 19. The chimes announced my train's departure. People began boarding around us. Funny thing is, my most vivid memory kind of got me turned into the national icon of the victory. Emotions behind us, to the giant mural. That was us, standing on the Jersey riverbank, watching the dawn over New York. We just got the word. It was VA Day. There was no cheering, no celebration. It just didn't seem real. Peace? What the hell did that mean? I've been afraid for so long, fighting and killing and waiting to die, that I guess I just accepted it as a normal fear for the rest of my life. I thought it was a dream. Sometimes it still feels like one, remembering that day, that sunrise over the hero city. Thank you all so much for listening to another episode of Quiet the Elk. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you were able to find some much needed rest and relaxation. And I'll see you all in the next episode. Thanks.